Well, it is time to get started. Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. I'm also joined today by Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. Today, we are going to be covering something that I've put off covering for a long time, and that is permissions. In fact, if you are familiar with the Transform User's Guide, you'll notice, well, right now it's chapters 1 through 7 are all the ones that have been completed, and we kept saying refer to chapter 8 for a greater discussion on permissions. So I knew it was time for me to actually do something about that. So today we're going to be covering that, and it will show up in the upcoming new release of the Alpha 5 User's Guide when that section is written. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Transform User's Guide, do send an email to TF Service, as in Transform Service, TF Service at alphasoftware.com, and we will get you a copy of that guide. It is very helpful when using Transform. So let's get right into it. Now, it's not true that I have never covered permissions before. In fact, when I was looking back through my slides, let me pop down here to slide 57. I had talked about using permissions to divide up your account into different departments. In this case, it was actually different businesses. Though not a terribly practical example, probably departments would have been more realistic. You can, in fact, divide up your account so that all of the forms for one person only are seen by that one person, only can be filled up by that one person, only reviewed, edited, deleted by one person. And you could have another set of forms for another person. In this example, I did one for Bob's Buildings, who had a lot of building tracker and project management needs, and one for Amy's Appliance Service. And so it was the same Transform account, but completely different set of forms and a completely different view for Bob than is the one for Amy. So let's dive into that a little bit further. But before I do, Sarah, how is the audio? Is that coming through okay? And can you see my screen?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. I'm going to scroll down to, I think we're at 225, 226. Today we're going to talk about permissions. Now, if you've clicked on that permissions tab in Transform Central, you probably have this expression on your face, at least the first time, which is, what the heck is going on here? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this permissions section here. We're going to divide it down into sections and conquer it that way, because you'll find that using permissions is actually very helpful in your application. I'm going to give you an example of that towards the end, a different example than the one I had shown earlier. So to begin with, permissions, and this is the best I could come up with, and it's not that great, are the settings that control actions allowed in certain circumstances by certain groups. So let's start unpacking the terminology that we use behind all of these things. The first thing I want to talk about are statuses. So a status is really nothing more than a built-in field in a form. Anytime you create a new form type, even though you don't create this one manually, there is a form called status, which is automatically created for you. And you can set that status in a couple different ways. You can set it using TPL, the Transform Programming Language, or you could set it simply by placing a submit button on your form and telling it that you want to update status. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a bit. So those are statuses. The 4 statuses that are included out of the box are open, submitted, approval, and closed. Open is the status that a form is set to automatically when it is first created and opened up by the user. All of the other ones, submitted, approval, and closed, need to be set either by a button or by TPL or in some other way. For example, in the management console, or even in the form filler, there's a menu choice for setting these statuses. You can use these as you want, but we knew that these may not be the right ones for everyone's business, so we made that customizable and that you can add other statuses. And in fact, later on, we are going to add another status, and I'll show you why we'll do that. What a status is used for is it's used to control what actions are allowed. Now, you don't actually set the permission right here in this status thing, but I'll show you how that works in a minute. The next term that I want to get into are roles. Think of that as a job. You know, this is your job to do form design, your job to fill out the forms. So a role describes a job. You set these on the Home tab, and users can have more than one role. So as a account owner, I typically take all of the roles and assign them to myself so that I can do anything that I want to in the account. And I can see any form, I can go to the form designer, I can go to the management console, and I can, right now we're not using supervisor for anything, but I can change account administration, I can add users and things like that. So that's role. Think of a role as a job. And here too, you can add new roles. These are the ones that we thought were helpful or useful, and they have some built-in functionality. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute, but you can add new ones, and we're going to do that in a bit. And then finally, the thing I want to talk about are permissions. Permissions are where we get right down into the weeds, and we talk about specifically what are you and are you not allowed to do, depending on who you are and depending on what circumstances you are in. So for example, you may or may not be able to browse form types. That is, look through a list of forms so that you could create a new blank form of a particular type. You might have types that you only want certain people filling out and you want them hidden from other people. So you can actually restrict that. You can restrict who can create a new form instance. You can restrict who can change the status of a field on a form and to what statuses they're allowed to change them to. You can actually differentiate between the permissions available in the mobile app and in TransForm Central. So for example, you might be able to see forms in the mobile app that you're not allowed to see in TransForm Central because we decided not to give you access to that. You can edit. We can choose whether or not you want to edit forms, both in the mobile app and in the TransForm app. The same thing with delete, and also whether or not you can create new form types. So now that when I said creating a new form type as opposed to a form instance behaves a little bit differently than the other permissions. So let me just talk about that for a second when we get into our next one, which is groups. So now, just by virtue of, in fact, let's go back here. So just by the virtue of the way that TransForm works, if you set the role of form designer to someone, it means that they will be able to see that form design tab in TransForm Central, and they'll be able to build their own form types. If you set it to Management Console as one of the options, and again, you can have multiple of these assigned to a single person, you'll see the Management Console, and you'll be able to do the things that are found under Management Console. Supervisor gives you no special powers. Account Administrator allows you to add and remove people from your account. I think the Account Administrator is the only person who's allowed to generate an API key as well. And then finally, there's the user. That's the person who's allowed to fill in forms on the mobile device. So these are automatically, they already know what to do. If you assign someone form designer, that's what they do. But what we come down to in this notion of groups are some other things that you may want to do. And those are specifically these types of permissions, the ability to see forms in TransForm Central, edit forms in the mobile app, and so on. And so this works by a principle we call it as groups. And what a group is it establishes a relationship between the role statuses and the permissions. By default, your account came with simple group, and that is the default group. And that group, when you create a brand new form, whether you know it or not, is automatically assigned. This is called simple group. So when you create a new form, your form automatically gets simple group as its group. But you don't have to. You can actually go into the editor and change it to a different one like I've done here. I've created a new group called training. Okay, so quick review. Statuses, that's just the field on a form. Roles, that's the job that a user has. Properties, those are the things that you are or are not allowed to do. And groups are what tie together the statuses, the roles, and the permissions together, and they're assigned to a form. Okay, so enough theoretical. Let's get down and actually take a look at it inside the application itself. So I'm going to go into Alpha TransForm over here, and I'm here in the Permissions tab, and I have added a new status called Needs Review. Okay, so that's just one of the new things that I can set that status field to. In the past, I could set it to open, submitted, approval, or closed. Now I can also submit it to Needs Review, or at least I can under certain circumstances. So brand new status I created. And to create that status, all I did was I hit this plus button here, and it creates this thing called New Status, and I just filled in a status ID and how I'd like it to display. I'm going to delete this one because I don't want that one there. So that's a new one. I also created a new role, and this role is called trainee. And I did that again by clicking the plus button and just filling in the information here. Now, imagine a trainee is a new person on the job, and you don't want to give them the real forms yet. You want to give them some forms to practice with so that they don't muddy up your database with irrelevant data. So what you're going to do is you're going to create some special training forms. We're going to create a special training form that's just for our brand new trainee. And only the trainee and the account administrator will have access to this. So the other users on the system won't see the trainee form. They don't need to use it. Likewise, the trainee won't see everyone else's forms. So that is our role here. So we've created trainee. Now, once we did that, we went up here into our groups section and we created a new group. Now, remember a moment ago, I told you about simple group. This is the default. Let me show you how simple group works so that you'll see what we need to do when we create our own group. So with simple group, here are the permissions. Here are the roles that are allowed to create new form instances. Almost everyone can create a new form instance, a user, account administrator, and someone with access to the management console. Now, I could say, hey, new form instances could be created by trainees just by clicking this box. But for simple group, we don't want to do that. And allowing to browse form types, in other words, just to see if that kind of form even exists in the first place, we've shut that off for trainees as well. So most of our forms are simple group type forms. And you'll notice the trainee has no ability to create a new one, no ability to browse one. And let's take a look under here. Here are the different statuses. They map over here to the status thing. If that status field is marked as open, right, and we're in this kind of group, then the user, someone who is marked as a user, is allowed to list, edit, and delete forms, and they're allowed to change the status to either submitted, approval, or closed, okay? So that's if you're a user. If you're an account administrator, we've marked almost everything of what you can do. If you're a form designer, you don't have any special abilities. And again, if you're a trainee, you have nothing. Well, let's keep going down here. If the status was set to submitted, again, the trainee has no rights here. If it's set to approval, again, the trainee has no rights here. If it's set to close, the trainee has no rights here. So the trainee really can't do anything whatsoever if you have marked a form or if your form type is a simple group. All right. So with that in mind, let's pop down because we're going to we created a new group that isn't a simple group, again, by hitting the plus button. I've already created it, so I can just scroll it down and show it to you. And my new, oops, it's not that one. My new group is called training, okay? So the people who are allowed to create new form instances if the form is marked for training are trainees and account administrators. Regular users don't have access to these training forms. The people who are allowed to browse that type of form, in other words, even see that it exists, that form type on their phone, is an account administrator, and then a trainee, again, doesn't exist for anyone else. And when the form is open, in other words, when a new instance is created, again, regular users can't see anything here, but trainees, take a look here, are allowed to list, to edit, and they're even allowed to change the status to needs review. Okay. The same as, again, we've given similar permissions for submitted and then approval and closed were ones that we didn't need, but we did need one for needs approval because that is that's one of the ones we would allow our trainees to do. So we've created this whole new group and we've given permissions only to the administrator and to someone whose role is trainee. Okay. So let's go take a look at a couple other parts of the TransForm Central and show you how these pieces work together. So I'm going to pop back over here to, that's kind of displaying strangely. Let me, I'm back here on the Home tab of Alpha TransForm, and I'm going to go and take a look at my user roles. And there should be two users, which will pop up here in a second. Ah, there they are. So there's me. I'm David Alpha Software, and I'm an account administrator, and I have all of these permissions, and I've marked myself as everything except a trainee. But then I have this other kind of junk email address or another user, which we'll pretend is another user, and it's been assigned trainee as its role. So it doesn't have any of these other roles. So if this person were to log in to TransForm Central, they wouldn't see the designer tab because they're not a designer. They wouldn't see the permissions tab because they're not an account administrator. They wouldn't see the account management console because they just simply have not been given permission to do any of that. The only thing a trainee is allowed to do is fill in forms that are marked as trainee forms. So that's how you set the roles. But now let's take a look at the form itself, because that's the other thing we need to set up. So I'm going over here into the designer, and in a moment it's going to load all of my list of form types, and I have quite a few here. But I created this special one called training form. So if you look at like I said, I probably have maybe 20 forms here, but I have this one in particular, training form, where if we look in the advanced features for training form, you will notice that I have set the status role permission group to training. If I click on this box, I could change it to something else if I wanted to. Now, as I said before, simple group is the one that's that your account comes with automatically, and it's the one that will automatically be assigned to a new form unless you specify otherwise. And in this case, I did specify otherwise. I said set it to training, which I've done here. All right. So now that that's set up, the expected behavior will be that if I log in as a user, as a trainee, the only kind of form I'm going to be able to see is this training form, and that's it. So let's just give that a shot. I'm going to go ahead and open up my phone. Okay, logging that. Okay, and let's open up TransForm, which is somewhere here. TransForm. All right, and I'm going to click add, and I'm already logged in, as you can see, as this trainee, YBS Dave. And I'm going to go over here to add form, and you'll notice I only have one form type to choose from. I don't have all of these other ones, and that's because I'm a trainee, and I've only said that I'm allowed to do that. So I'm going to click the training form. I'm going to fill in some of this. For those who haven't seen the pre-release of TransForm, we have nice bigger buttons up here at the top, which I think is a big improvement. Let me punch in a number in the number field and punch in some other random number here. And I'm going to click submit form. And I'm going to upload this one form, and up it goes. Okay, and now it appears here on my list of forms that I filled out. So let me close that down, because the one thing I wanted to show you, you see this upload form button, is I want to show you how I built that upload form button and how I got it to set the right status. Let me just shut off screen mirroring. All right, let's go back into the form here. You'll see here are my 3 fields in the designer, and here is my change status button. And here are the statuses. All I had to do when I put in this type of button, all I had to do is select what I want to set it to. And so I'm going to set it to needs review. That was that special status that we had set up in the statuses section that's just for trainees. So if I go back here, you'll see it's there. So when I click submit form, that form goes from open to needs review. Now from there, of course, you could do lots of things. You could search for only the fields that need review. You could access this through an API or something like that. So there's a lot of things you can do for building out a workflow. But that pretty much covers the permissions section of it. So quick review, statuses, just simply a field that it's built into the form. You can create new values that could go into that field if you like, but the 4 that come are these 4, open, submitted, approval, and closed. You have a bunch of 5 roles that come out of the box, but you can add additional ones. You have a simple group which connects the status and the roles and the related permissions together to indicate who's allowed to do what and under what circumstances. And you can create your own group that has a different set of rules about who's allowed to do what under what circumstances, and you can assign that to a form. So I hope that slightly demystifies the permissions issue, but if we have any questions, now will be the time to take them. Pre-release notes for Alpha TransForm. Yes, there will be pre-release notes. Okay, so here's our first question. Any plans to have pre-release notes for Alpha TransForm like you have for Alpha Anywhere? Yes, and we do have a new version that will be coming out, but before it comes out, we are setting up a test environment. In other words, a separate database, so that we will notify you weeks in advance. I'm hoping at least 2, so that you can test out the new features and make sure that they work the way you expect them to. Make sure that your existing work continues to work in the new version, and then report back anything to us. And then after that, the release candidate will become the official version. So look for those. Give us about a week or so. We were expecting to have a new reverse release a little earlier. We had a lot of people on vacation this month in August. That's what happens in the summertime. So I'm shooting for next week to give you a notification of what the new features are. There are a few really cool ones. The bigger buttons are in the new release. That's another question that was asked, as is the concept of queues. And let me just show you queues because I have a couple minutes left. Don't know if I've got queues in this version or if I have to log into another version. Okay, no, it's not in this version, but basically what queues will let you do, tip is it'll allow you to create and partially fill out a form in the management console. That's no big deal, you could do that already. But instead of assigning it to a particular user for them to see it on their phone, you'll be able to assign it a queue, and you'll be able to make different people members of that queue. So when they open up their phone, they will be able to look at these forms that have been assigned to anyone, and they can claim them, so that they'll say, yes, okay, I'll fill this one out, or I'll fill that one out. And then that will come out of the queue, and it will be assigned to them, and it shows up on their phone, and it disappears from the queue, so other people can't claim it. So kind of a cool feature. It's fairly common in other Forms products, and it was a feature that had been requested, and we're happy to see that it's been added. Let's see what else we've got here. A year ago, a presentation was made on Alpha Anywhere reporting, linking to TransForm, showing how to convert the JSON data to be used in the report writer. Has that process been simplified, made quicker and easier? Is there a different way to transfer the data to existing reports? Well, within the last year, Alpha Anywhere has made TransForm a first-class citizen in terms of data. So I believe that you can actually just choose that as its data source, as opposed to choosing SQL Server or some other, or DBF or some other thing. You can choose TransForm, and you enter in the API key and you select the form that you want to use, and you can just start going to town building out reports like that. If you'd like more information, just go ahead and send an email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. And I've mentioned TF Service a couple of times, but it is an email that is monitored by me, developers, our documentation person, Sarah, and a bunch of other people. So if you have questions, send them in there. We can point you to the right documentation. We can give you help, anything you need to get going in TransForm. And let's see, what else have I got? Was there an issue last week with TransForm Tuesday? It was canceled at the very last minute. So if it looked like you could log in, but then you couldn't, that's totally my bad. Just something came up and was unable to get to it, but was able to do it this week, fortunately. Do we have any other questions? Or is that about it? Wonderful. Well, hey, thank you everyone for attending. Thanks for asking questions. Again, tfservice@alphasoftware.com if you need to reach us. Take care and hope to see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.